For those of you that have been a little more obedient than the others, thank you. For those who are disobedient, may God have mercy on your soul. So,
This is for the other speakers.
okay,
Your mic.
just put it right there, and we'll have Micah do the running. So, we're a couple minutes behind in getting started, and I'm going to put us a couple more minutes behind. I've told some of you this. Most of you know that I like to laugh. And I had the best laugh that I've had all week this morning when I came into church about 45 minutes ago. I came into the nursery, I came into the foyer, and they were practicing, so I didn't want to interrupt them, so I thought I'll go back in the nursery and I'll say hello to the girls. So I go back in the nursery and there's nobody there. However, the drawer in that bottom right-hand cabinet is bumping. And in front of it was the little stool for the rocking chair, keeping the drawer from opening. So I go over and I look and I move the stool and the drawer slowly comes open. And Molly is in there looking up at, Clara is in there looking up at me saying, "A little help here, please." So apparently, Clara had hidden from Molly, and Molly blocked her in so she couldn't get out. So let me pray, and then we'll start this part of our congregational meeting. Father, we thank you that through this past year, for many years, you have sustained this church. You have provided us with opportunities to minister, both here and around the world. You've given us the resources, once again, to support ministry, to extend the name of Jesus, and we thank you for that. We come into this new year with a sense of anticipation and excitement, expecting that once again you will have ministry for us and will provide resources by which we may be faithful. I thank you for the faithful people in this church who are part of that resource provision. I thank you that you have blessed us enough that we are able to give out of what you've given us so that we can fund the ministries. As we go through this morning, this time now, when I preach and after church at the full meeting, pray, Father, you will direct the conversations, be present among us, and let us hear from you as you may want to find times to speak. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. So you should have an agenda now. So here are the plans for today. We're going to look in a couple of minutes at the budget. You have been given a copy of it. I'll talk about that. Tom, do you want to discuss the cash thing in this meeting as well? Do you have enough copies for everybody? Okay, I'll need a copy as well, Tom. So we'll look at the budget and the way the year ended. We'll have ministry reports from several of our ministry leaders, and we'll talk a little bit about what God has done this last year. Then we'll have the worship service. Then we'll have lunch, pizza, and salad in the fellowship hall. We have a bylaws requirement that once a year our congregation has to meet, and that we vote to approve a budget and to vote to retain leadership in the deacons and the financial secretary. So those are the things that we're going to be doing today. And I want to begin, first of all, Tom, why don't you come up here and I'll get out of your way and you talk to us, and Micah will give you the microphone. You talk to us a little bit about how the year ended up and the finances that we have. And you have a copy for me.
Yeah. I just got a shock from Micah. He handed me this thing with Zap
You got a shock from the mic.
from Micah, the mic from Micah.
Okay. So here's Tom.
Okay. Have most of you got the copy of the cash funds? I still have a few more here if we don't have them, didn't get them all out. In any case, Scott's going to go over in the detail what the different budget items are, but what I have prepared for you here is just to show you what happens to the cash or the funds that have taken place over the last few years, which is kind of interesting. If you look at the graph that I put down in the bottom there, in 2018, it shows, wow, we had $50,000 in the bank at the end of 2018. And that happens to be because at the end of 2018, we had put on a drive to find out how people could help us fund things that we wanted to do the following year. And we received gifts at the end of December of that year of $24,600. Wow, so that jumped that thing way up there. And that's the yellow color that you see there in that chart. And since that time, and let me continue here, on the top of the chart is the orange, and that's our normal balance that we maintain throughout the year, which helps us to continue on with all the ministry. And if you look at from year to year, in 2018, that orange has grown each year, whereas the gift that we had has slowly been going down. And that's because we continually, as we budget items to make up some of the shortfall between what the actual giving is and the actual expenses are, that's what we used that gift money for that period of time. So the gift has come down dramatically from 2018 to 19, about $16,000 worth, but by the time it got down to this last year, we only used another $5,000 out of it, so there's still $8,000, almost $9,000 left in that gift left over from 2 years ago. So we have not suffered at all cash-wise, thanks to you folks, the way that you continue to give to support the regular ministry. All the charts up at the top there, the color codes coincide with the ones I have in the chart. The very bottom says green, that's our savings account balance, been running consistently, $7,400. It went up $2 in the last 2 years because that's the only interest you get on savings account anymore, hardly anything. The blue is the funded accounts. We do have what we call funds. People give money. We have money for the relief fund, if you see, the youth fund, FaithWorks fund, designated missions, payables, and Cuban missions. All those funds are things that we have agreed to pay, and we set aside that money for it. That's what the blue is. And it maintains somewhat the same throughout the year. And so the orange has grown, which is the non-dedicated bank balance from 11.7. It's up to 13,251. And it's just that the use of those gifts in order to help sustain some of the other ministry items is the only thing that's going down. So prior to that gift in 2018 with $24,000, you can see our balance would have only been around $26,000 totally in addition to that. So that was what jumped it up. And the gift has continued to gradually be used up as we continue on with our budget items, which will Scott go into details. So that's mainly just to show you where the money is. This is all God's money that we received, and it's still being utilized for the ministry of this church. And Scott will show you that we've been blessed in how you all have kept giving for it. So any questions on that? Picture worth 1,000 words. So there's the picture down the end. Okay, thank you.
Just give that back to Micah, the microphone. So you've got a budget page. If you'll look at that for a minute, I'll look at the highlights there, and then as you may have specific questions, we'll try to answer them. Notice that across the top, each column has a letter, A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on. Down the left margin, you see numbers. So if you have a specific question, it'll help me to answer it if you'll say, well, I'm looking at column D, line 22. Instead of saying, well, it's the ministry services total, it's about in the middle of the page, that takes too long to get there. So look down at the very bottom, line 50, and we'll go across starting with column C. So line 50 is our total budgeted expenses. And in column C, you see our budget for the year we just finished. Our budget was $132,505. We actually spent, look at column E, $119,000. So we did not spend everything that was in the budget. Lots of reasons for that. The COVID restrictions meant that we weren't using the building as much, so our utilities were down. We weren't doing as many activities, so we weren't expending funds on activities. So if you look then across now to line 50 and column column H. This is the budget that we project, $122,595. Now, in order for us, look at line 51 immediately below it, we have to average $2,358 per week. Now, if you remember, each month, the first week or so after the end of a month, we print in the bulletin on the back cover a giving and attendance recap. And we show what the giving and attendance was for that month we just finished, and then we show what the giving and attendance was for that year. Now, if you look at, let me find my place here. If you look at column E, line 2, clear up at the top, we see that in 2020, the giving was $114,000. And so we were $5,000 short on meeting our expenses. If you look at line 50, column E, which is 119, column E, line 2, 114, $5,000. That's where we took the money out of the savings account, out of the gift balance that Tom was talking about. So we met all of our obligations, and we still ended up with money at the end of the year. So column H, we are, and down at row 50, we anticipate that our budget this year will be $122,595. So that's a little bit more than we received last year in giving, and we expect that our giving this year, because we've had people move away who were very faithful, some in leadership, some not, but many people who have moved were very faithful in their giving, and we expect that our giving will be a little lower this year. However, if you look back at this page for a minute, see the one I'm holding up? If you look back at this page, if you take in that column that says 2020 up at the top, in the green line, you see our savings account has $7,400. And if you look down the third line up from the bottom, you see that we have our gift balance of $8,700. And immediately below that is what's in our checking account that isn't dedicated to some other purpose. If you add all three of those up, you get to about $29,500. That's money that we have available as we may need it if we have a shortfall in giving. We could not have predicted this time last year what would occur with people who moved. We couldn't have predicted what would happen as a result of COVID. But one of the things that we go into this year with is a lot of confidence that God has provided in the past. He has given us money that will help us as we have other opportunities to minister that we may not know of now. We may have other difficulties that will occur. We could have a furnace failure. We could have a problem with the roof. We have adequate funds, as near as we can project, to deal with whatever happens. But our confidence is not in that bank account. Our confidence is that the God who put that bank account where it is knows what he's doing, and we will be able to deal with whatever will come up. And so when we look at the budget, one of the things that I want to keep reminding us of is that a budget is not merely a bunch of numbers on a page. It is not a list of stuff we're going to spend money on. A budget is a ministry plan. And what I mean by that is, if you were to read a biography of someone who had died 300 years ago, and you were going to try to write their biography, you would look to see what kind of life they lived. And one of the things you would look at, if you could find it, was a way to see how they spent their money. Now it's a little easier. If you die and I can get access to your bank account, I can see how you value your life. I can see what your priorities are. And it would tell me, for instance, that your income might have been $50,000 last year. But I would see that you gave $10,000 to the church. That showed that your priority was what God had called you to do. Or I might see that you gave $500 to the church, and that would tell me what your priority is. So our budget, the plan we have, tells you what our priorities are. And so I want to touch on a couple of things that reflect that. So if you look at line 49 and look at column H, the one far over on the right, that is the single largest category of expense. That's what we pay our staff. And you can see the different line items there. Perhaps the only one that might be a little bit of a mystery to you would be that line 45, pastor's professional expense. If I have a book that I hear about that I think might help me in my study, I will buy the book or have Robin purchase the book, and the $12 that book costs comes out of professional expense. There was a time years ago when Dave was pastor, and then when I became pastor, when my gasoline expense, if I went to Reading to the hospital to visit somebody, if I drove over to the rehab center to visit somebody who was there, I would be reimbursed for my gas. I quit worrying about that a long time ago. It was too much trouble to keep track of it. So the only thing really that I spend money on is buying books that help me study. So as I say, that may be something that is a mystery to you. My salary remains the same. Our secretary's salary will be a little lower this year. Last year, between them, Gina, for the months that she was here, and Robin for the 2.5 or 3 months she was here, were paid a little over $16,000. This year, I'm anticipating it'll be about $12,000. Part of that is that the church office will be, instead of being open 4 days a week, we found when Gina, through the COVID experience, was managing the office, and then when Robin came in, that all of the things that needed to be done by the church secretary could be done in 2 days. And so while the church office is no longer open the other 2 days, we find that in this case, Robin can get everything done. She's very competent, not more competent or less competent than Gina. God's blessed us in this church with good people all along. But we have 2 fewer days that our secretary will be working. And so that's why we're saving a little bit of money there. The other expenses are pretty much the same. If you look back up at line 43, that's our operations. Let's see. Tom, would you get your phone calculator out I want you to get me a percentage. I want you to see what percentage the missions total is of our budget. Okay? You'll be dividing the 21.7 by the 122. So our operations expenses to run the copier, to pay our insurance, to buy the office supplies, to pay the utilities, that's almost $20,000. That's going to be about the same as it was last year. Our missions total, line 33, that has stayed pretty constant for the last couple of years. Last year, when our giving went down a little bit, we did not have to cut support to the missionaries. Dave had written them a letter telling them that we were facing difficulty, asking them to pray, and they did. You prayed, and God took care of us. If you look at our ministry services total, that's line 22. This year we're anticipating $3,700 worth of cost or expense. And if you look back to the budget last year, it was almost $6,000. But we bought last year a camera for $2,000 to be able to do online streaming. Someday we'll have that operating and we'll be very happy about it. We see other things that have gone down a little bit, but that $3,750 is what we use to minister. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place. No, I'm in the right place. I had to catch myself. If you look at what we do in outreach, the primary thing we're doing now is giving money to LifeNet. If you look at the line above, line 11, there's $7,300 being spent on buildings and grounds, everything from the alarm system to the sewage and water to the disposal service, all of those things. So the upshot of it is that our budget this year, line 50, column H, is a little under $123,000. And in order for us to be able to meet that, then line 51, weekly, we will have to get $2,300 a week to meet our expenses as we've budgeted them. Before I go on, do you have any questions? Okay, so now I want to show you, and Dave, I meant to call you yesterday and I got tied up and didn't. Look at your agenda now at item 2 that says finances. Look at where it says Pastor Scott, and then look at year-by-year comparison. Our attendance at the end of this year has averaged about 31 people. That's adults and children. And if I'm looking right now, we've got about 18 or 20 people here now. Last year, we were averaging 60 people in our service. If you look at our giving, this year, for the whole year, we have averaged $2,300. If you look at last year, we averaged $2,300 and about $60 or $70 less. In fact, Dave, what I'm saying is, when I added up the giving, again, this year compared to last year, our giving was actually higher this year by a very small amount, but it was higher. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
I couldn't, you should have called me.
I did. Or I should have. You're right. And I expect when you get home today, you'll check it and call me. And if I have to correct it next week, I will. But my point is, in spite of the fact that our attendance was significantly decreased because of COVID issues, God still blessed us with adequate giving to get everything covered and to not have to cut back on staff or missionary support. So we'll go through this again when we have the congregational meeting after the service. I expect that there'll be another 10 or 12 people who will show up in about half an hour for the service. But we have to vote in the formal meeting, not in this meeting. But before I go on, let me stop now. Any questions or comments to make as you have looked at the budget? Yes, hang on, Larry. Larry, hang on. Okay, go ahead.
Line 30, Wangs.
Yes.
I just wondered what that is.
Uh,
8,500.
All of the lines from line 23 through 32 are individual ministry missions that we support. And the Wangs, W-A-N-G, that is Nikki and her husband Henry and the two little girls who are in China. And normally in the summer, they will be home to visit. Her parents still live in Red Bluff, but this year, because of COVID, they couldn't come home. But she is a young woman who grew up as a child in this church, came to church with her grandfather, and God called her to the mission field. In fact, if you look at the missions things, if you look at line 25, Ripe for Harvest, the Hines, line 26, Peru, line 27, the Portugals, line 30, the Wongs, line 31, the Whatleys. All of those people have a connection to our church. That is, they either went to this church as children and grew up in this church, and God called them to the missions field. And so we see that Bridgeway, formerly North Valley, we have a history of being able to see God use people that grow up in our church and call them to missions. And that's a plus. Tom, did you get that percentage?
On the missions,
Yes,
and the missions is running right around 17% of our total
17%.
expenses.
Yeah, that percentage is a little higher because our giving didn't go up, but our goal eventually is to be able to have 20% of our income go to support missionaries. And whether we would add funds to existing missionaries or whether we would add additional missionaries, we'll decide that when we get to that point. Are there any questions then before I turn it over to Dave to talk about missions and that ministry? Anything else? Okay, here's Dave.
Okay, so I'm going to be basically talking about that 17% that is going to missions and give you some updates and some clarity on what's going on with our missionaries out there. But I'm going to start with the Hines and the Weisners. They are both basically stuck at home because of COVID right now.
Stuck at home, meaning here in the
Meaning
States.
Here stateside. And, but that doesn't mean that they're not still engaged in their ministries. They're just looking for ways to improve on what they're doing and continue their ministries there. Actually, the Hines were stuck in India trying to get back home. And it turned out that the U.S. government sent planes to India to pick up U.S. citizens and bring them home. So they got really fortunate and got to get on one of those government-sponsored flights home. But once they got here, they were basically stuck. But thanks to the internet, they get to continue ministry, and so do the Weisners in the academy and the church building that they're doing in Kuala Lumpur. I have not heard from Requats at all in about a year and a half, and I think that might be because I got a new email address because my old one got hacked, and quite frankly, I have not been able to contact them, but I'm going to make better effort at that. Here in the near future, I will email them and let them know. So basically, I kind of dropped the ball on that one, but please forgive me, and I'll have more information next time we speak. The Portugals are at home in Spain. They had to come back to the States for a quick moment to bring one of their daughters to college, but they promptly returned. And their ministry is growing, and Spain is a really hard country to minister in because, you know, the smarter you are, the less you need dependence on God kind of thing. Europe is really struggling for the gospel, and they don't seem to be interested. So the fact that a ministry there is actually starting to thrive is a big deal. But in addition to that, they're also caring for Dan's elderly parents, who was the letter that I shared with you guys last Sunday in church about the old guy that was thanking my dad for ministering in Peru. So, but they're doing well. Henry and Nikki are also doing well, and it seems like things are thriving for them in their ministry. They don't know whether they're going to get to come home this summer, but it seems like things are loosening up in China right now as far as COVID is concerned, so they may get to travel home, but they're not sure yet. The one thing that I do ask is that you keep them in prayer, because Henry's been struggling with some physical issues. He's been having he's been having headaches and insomnia and chest pains at different times, and so we want to keep them in prayer, because we want Henry to be healthy and, you know, and do what God has called them to China to do, even though he is Chinese. Another thing too is to just keep them in prayer for the difficulty of sharing the gospel in a closed out society. And so we want to keep them in prayer there. The Watleys, who's of course my brother, they had to move to the jungle from where they were at up in the high altitude, because he had migraine headaches so bad that he couldn't even get out of bed for days at a time sometimes, and just didn't feel like ministry was going forward because of it. So he started preaching in a small town down in the jungle, about, I don't know, 5,000 feet lower elevation than where he was at, and his migraines seemed to go away. So that ministry is actually thriving right now, and they're in the process of finishing a church building that they got to build, and I've been watching it on Facebook, and from when they had to dig out the hillside all the way up to now, it's a 3-story building with, and they just put doors on it last week. So that ministry is thriving. If you look at your budget, at the very top of the mission, there's a column that says Macedonia Christian Academy. What that is my niece, Brianna, is going into missions as well, and she will be a 3rd-generation missionary, which is very, very rare. And she started out her career in a mission school down in Texas called Macedonia Christian Academy. And she's been there 2 years, and when she went there, she started seeking support. So I brought it before the board, and the board says, yeah, let's help her out. Well, now she's in the process of seeking God to go to Peru as a missionary, a single woman missionary, to help in the ministry that her parents and my parents have been working in for years. So let's keep her in prayer. Her name is Brianna.
Dave, remind me when we get into the larger meeting and we're talking about the budget, as you're saying this, now she's Tim and Barbara's daughter, is that correct?
Yes.
I think, given the resources that we have, that we ought to consider increasing her support. And I'd like for you to bring that up in the full meeting when we approve the budget.
Okay, I would be glad to do that. Now, the only issue is that if she gives up the ministry she's doing at Macedonia Christian Academy, and she goes to Peru, she does not have a sending mission board yet, and I'm not real sure how we can legally send her funds without having an entity to go through.
Figure it
But
out.
we'll figure that out. And that would be really great for her to know that this church could support her even better. She's a single lady, and, single ladies need to be treated like missionaries too. And so I would thank you for that. Then real quick, the other three entities that we support in missions are Christian learning centers. And Agua Viva, I got one of the brochures that they sent out recently, and they seem to be thriving even though they're having COVID. They're still in action and doing well. Peru Bible Institute is actually doing really well. What happened during COVID is all the students got locked in to the compound, so that's all they had to do was study. And they graduated 4 or 5 pastors, it seems to me like, just in December, and they all went out into their local communities where they came from. Some may be 50 miles away, and some may be 100 miles away.
You got about 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm getting close. So anyhow, they're doing really well, and we praise God for that. Now, the last one that I have to talk about, and this will take up our 30 minutes, Pastor Scott, or my 3 minutes, 30. I want 30. A Cuba Bible Institute. Okay, so basically, Cuba Bible Institute is what I would consider an Iron Curtain Bible teaching place. Things are really difficult there now. The government has changed their currency to where it's basically worth nothing, and then they redid their stipending system to where now lay ministers and ministers don't get the help that they used to get, so they are struggling financially. And I brought this up to the board the other day, and one of the board members said, even though we had right in the neighborhood of about $1,500 that had accrued, plus a generous offering that was given to them, about $1,500. And one of the board members said, I think we need to separate a total of $3,000 for them to get going, if we can get it to them. So all week this week I've been struggling to find ways to get it to them. I've even considered and talked to my dad about maybe sending it to him and seeing if he could get it in from Peru. But that wouldn't work either because they don't have a bank account, nor can they get one because they're not elites or elite businesses. Just the common folk or churches can't get bank accounts in Cuba. So finally he told me that they have a way through this lady in Florida, and I'll be talking to the board about that in just a little bit, that we could probably get them that money. So if we can get them that money, I'm sure they're going to be blessed by it. So also, if you feel like supporting a ministry that's really, really struggling and can't get funds, I would consider you make a special offering above and beyond your giving to the ministry for the Institute in Cuba. Thank you.
So I'm looking, and Teresa, I think I've got about 5 minutes. If you can get done, you need 3, then come up, and here's Teresa to talk about women's ministry for 3 minutes.
Just a quick overview of what women's ministry does. We support and pray for the pastors and deacons. We organize church social gatherings such as potlucks, family night events, holiday events such as Easter brunch and hanging of the greens. We take care of the prayer chain, the meal train, funerals and wedding events, communion preparation and cleanup. We attempt to decorate and keep our church lively and inviting, and we take care of the kitchen pantry and keep it stocked and cleaned, and we attempt to provide meals for the leadership meetings. 2020 saw a lot of changes in what we're able to do and how we were able to do things. We had no social gatherings, more time in our homes, and less time spent in our church building with our brothers and sisters in Christ. We have continued to support our pastors and deacons in prayer and through encouragement whenever possible. We have also continued to maintain prayer chain, the meal train ministries, and we have attempted to keep our church interior welcoming and appealing. This year, we hope to continue to reach out to Red Bluff Senior Living as we did at Christmas with cookies and song. Normally, we have a person handling children's ministry who sits on our board. At the current time, we have no active children's ministry. This is due for two main reasons. Number one, we have very few children at times, especially with COVID. And number two, we have no one who feels led to fill the shoes of the Christian Ministries coordinator. I would ask that you would pray about this and see how God leads us in this area as to whether he will bring someone who feels comfortable to fill this area and children, or if we're to continue as we are right now. I just ask that you would keep that area in prayer. The members of our board are myself, Susan Accord, Sharon Briltz, Lynn Squire, who heads our prayer chain, Shirley Pettit, Sarah Pettit, Diane Everhart, Sheena Officer, Deanna Gee, and Robin Horn. Any questions? All right, that's us.
Hey, Teresa.
Yeah, Mike.
I'm sorry. You guys are still attempting to cover the same sort of ministry bases that you were 12, 18 months ago. Can you say, as far as people being able to be actively involved, number of women involved, how has that changed?
We have a lot fewer women that are involved. We have several who have been inactive, just on our board alone, who have been inactive during COVID. And we have less support from the congregation because we have fewer people here that are able to do it. So that would also be a prayer that you would keep, that we have workers to help us with these things. That would be really appreciated.
And then the other blessing for me is that I get to meet with Teresa and Robin every week. And so in addition to all of the things that she mentioned that they do, it is anything else that I can think up on the spur of the moment. And I try not to be too hard on them, but we are really, really blessed to have the faithful women in this church. So it's time for us to stop and get ready for the service. Any questions before we close this part of the congregational meeting? Okay, then deacons, let me see you back in my office, and we'll be back out for church. Larry, would you and George do me a favor and move this back over against the wall there? And I'll get this up here for me for later.